Okay, so we're now going to get into some of the really meaty content. This is the juicy stuff that I really want you to be able to understand. So you might actually find that you need to watch this one a couple of times, which is totally fine. You might want to jot down some notes if that's how you like to learn and retain information. But also encourage you to go and do further research on what I'm sharing here. These are really psychologically sound, very grounded, theories and concepts. But I want to say that when we're talking about attachment styles, this is not diagnostic at all. Okay. So I don't want you to like go, that's my attachment style and I'm stuck with it for life. And that's what this means about me. They don't apply, in black and white for everyone. They're not absolutely spot on for every single human. But this is a really powerful concept that I learned when I was studying social work, but then I really, really saw in action when I was working in both out of home care, foster care, foster care, kinship care, and also in high risk adolescent units. So I actually worked for a couple of years in high risk adolescent residential units where we had high risk adolescents. So there was a lot of self-harming, drug and alcohol use, violence, that kind of thing. These were adolescents that it was no longer safe for them to live either at home with a family member or in a foster care situation. So put in these residential units and they were staffed and supported and given a lot of therapeutic support, basically. And so I really saw when I would read these children's, young people's files, I really saw attachment styles playing out over their adolescence and adulthood. And so it's just been a really kind of fundamental theory that I really, love to teach others or help people understand. And it has helped me a lot in therapy as well to understand my own. Okay. So attachment styles, we're going to learn about attachment styles, remembering that what we're focusing on with attachment styles is the under the surface stuff. So this is your biology, your physiology. Yes, there is behaviors that are acted out, but they come from this idea of how you're organized internally from a young age. I'm going to explain more. But in the building analogy, we're looking at what's below the surface. These are the biology, the actual really strong foundations that are underneath you. Okay. So, attachment styles. Attachment styles are characterized by different ways of interacting and behaving in relationships. That's what an attachment style is. Like, how do you interact and engage in relationship? Okay. And so during early childhood, these attachment styles are centered on like how the child and the parent interacts. And then in adulthood, we look at how what are your patterns of attachment in romantic relationships or friendships, but also could be still obviously with your family of origin. And so this theory grew out of attachment styles, grew out of attachment theory and research that came out in the 1960s and 1970s. And so today, most therapists, most psychologists recognize that there's 4 main attachment styles. Some people have a bit of a combination of both, but these are just, again, sort of main tenets that you can take what feels right for you and just have a greater understanding, okay? So attachment, when we think about attachment, it's a really special emotional relationship. I'm attached to you, right? It involves generally some kind of exchange of comfort or care, pleasure. It's usually reciprocal. And so the roots of attachment, the roots of research on attachment really began around like Freud's theories on love. But John Bowlby in the 60s and 70s devoted his extensive research time to the concept of attachment being, and he describes it as a lasting psychological connectedness between human beings. Okay. Quote, end quote. And so he really talked about and brought to the profession of psychology this idea that early experiences in childhood are really important for influencing the development of behavior later in life, which I know now we kind of go, yeah, but back in the 60s and 70s, that wasn't really a concept that people thought about. So our early attachment styles established in childhood through that infant sort of caregiver parent-child relationship. And then, and really, in the early days, it's around survival. Okay, so making emotional bonds to particular adults that will keep me alive, right? That's what the baby thinks. That's what the infant thinks. And so the characteristics of attachment usually are around, safety and survival, and very much linked to that biological response. So can you see how, as an adult, when you have a conversation with someone who's really important to you, that you love, that you want to maintain a relationship with, that all of this stuff can come up around being abandoned, being rejected, and being left alone, and not being comforted, and not having love, and not having connection, right? So John Bowlby talks about, the four distinguishing characteristics of attachment. So proximity maintenance. So we want to be near people we are attached to. We want to hang out with our friends. We want to see our children. We want to be with our partner. So proximity. Safe haven, right? We want that attachment person to bring us comfort and safety in fear or threat when we're little. But think about that for you right now with maybe if you do have a partner or a close friend even, this can play out there where you are like, I want them to bring me safety. I want them to protect me if I'm under threat. Okay, so safe haven. Secure base. So this is like, it's a safe space to come back to. It's a safe base to come back to. So if you are in an intimate relationship, you maybe are married or de facto, you've been with someone for a long time, you'll know that during the day, you want to go out and explore, you want to have these experiences, but you know that you come back to a safe space, all right? You might have a parent figure and you know that you're out being an adult in the world now, but you want them to be there if, something awful happens in your life and you need some support. So again, when you're a child, you want to go to school, you want to go visit friends, you want to, even as a little baby, maybe you've just started to crawl, you just leave the room and know that you can come back to a safe, secure base. So attachment theory and what we call the circle of security is really, really premised on this secure base. Okay. And it's also one of the characteristics of attachment is separation distress. So there's a bit of anxiety or sadness or some discomfort when that person isn't there. That attachment figure isn't there. So yeah, that gives you sort of I just want to explain what attachment even is so you can understand how this plays out in childhood and in adolescence. All right. So if you were raised in a home where there were those characteristics, so there was proximity, so the people that cared about you and cared for you were close by most of the time, or if you went to childcare or school, those people there, okay, they were really kind and they loved you and they cared for you. That if you grew up with a safe haven, if you grew up with that secure base, if you grew up with a little bit of separation distress, not separation anxiety to its full kind of thing, but like you're like, oh, I miss my mum when I don't see her, or I miss my grandparents when they don't visit, right? There's some absence there, but it was healthy and it showed you how much you cared about them. If you grew up with that, so you're raised with the confidence that you were safe and loved and you would be protected, then you are less likely to experience fear. All right. But if you grew up in an environment that was really disorganized and, the caregivers were not available emotionally or physically, or maybe there was physical threat, or when you did return to them with some sadness or big feelings, they just didn't give a crap. If you had any kind of that environment, then you would probably have been raised with a bit of fear around relationships and not particularly feeling safe in them. Okay. So what else do I want to say on that? Yeah, I think that's all I want to say on that. So that was sort of the core attachment research that was done by Bowlby. Then in the 70s, psychologist Mary Ainsworth took that research and worked on it again. And so she observed children a little bit older. So she observed children 12 to 18 months old. Bowlby very much did a lot of research on the first year of life. I forgot to say, sorry. But she really looked at sort of 12 to 18 months of age, right? So this is generally around the time that you would have been starting to explore your world outside of the arms of your caregiver. Okay, you're probably being able to walk or run away from your caregiver potentially. So there's more exploration of the world. Okay. She did a really cool study. You can go and read up or look at it if you like. It's called Strange Situation Study, in which she put a parent and a 12 to 18-month-old in a room and watched how they interacted alone. And the child would explore with the parent there. And then a stranger would come in. She'd observe what the child did when the stranger came in. You know, a healthy, well-attached child might go to the parent and seek comfort. And then the parent leaves the room. What happens there with the stranger? The stranger leaves the room and the baby's alone. What happens there? And she just really observed, right? And then the parent comes back and comforts the child. And so based on these observations, she concluded that there were three major styles of attachment. So secure attachment, ambivalent insecure, and avoidant insecure. All right. So there's a few out. There's also, disorganized insecure attachment. Right. I'm going to go through the main four for you because I think that they're really critical to understand. And I think most people can see themselves or someone that they love or care about in that as well. All right. But yeah, that's kind of where this attachment styles theory has come from. And yeah. And we don't want to understand this and just like blame our parents for all of our relationship issues now as an adult. We're not doing that because we have to understand that they also had attachment styles that were formed very early on in their childhood. And it's not necessarily a precursor to all your relationships going this way. It's just about having, again, awareness around what our attachment styles are. So I think we'll just dive in. Yeah. So let's start with secure attachment. And so as I'm going through these four attachment styles, I really just want you to be aware and go, hey, I think that is how I feel and what comes up for me as how I react in my relationships. Or it might be like, that's my relationship with my intimate partner, my husband, my wife, or whatever. But I don't know. That's not how I react with my parent or my sibling. That's not what shows up for me in that relationship. So it can differ depending on what you've created, what you've healed with certain relationships, what you haven't. And as I said, how they kind of were set up in your early childhood. Okay. So just bringing awareness. So secure attachment. Secure attachment is what I said a little bit earlier, right? So you feel secure and safe. You feel like you'll be protected. There's not a lot of fear in the relationship. You feel like you can show up and be yourself. So children who are securely attached generally become, a little bit upset when their caregivers leave and happy when they come back. When they're frightened, they'll go to their caregiver and seek comfort because their caregiver is a safe person for them. Okay. If that parent comes over and hugs them, then it's just pretty readily accepted by securely attached children, right? And they give positive behavior back. All right. So they can be comforted by an external person, a teacher or a grandparent, but they really do have that one kind of safe relationship, safe relationships. So studies have shown that children with secure attachment in childhood are more empathetic during later stages of childhood, less disruptive, less aggressive, and more mature than children who have the other attachment styles as well. Okay. So how would you know, right? How does secure attachment show up? Well, as I said, in children, they can separate from the parent healthily, but might feel, a little bit sad, but they can come back. They can seek comfort from the parent. They greet the parent with positive emotions when they see them. They prefer their parents to strangers, right? That's all normal stuff for a secure attachment, right? Adults, you might exhibit this as having really trusting and lasting relationships. So that could be your friendships, it could be your intimate relationships, but they're trusting, there's love, there's safety. You tend to have good self-esteem. So you're someone that's like, I'm a good person and I do my best in relationships and with conversations that I have with people. You may, share information with partners and friends. That feels easy to you and really fun and light. And you'll seek out social support when you need it. You won't just withdraw. And you're less likely, not always, but less likely to be as reactive in conversations that are really, really tough for you to have. Okay. Now we have then got ambivalent attachment. So ambivalent, right? So children who are ambivalently attached tend to be really suspicious of strangers. Okay. So they'll be distressed when separated from a parent or caregiver. And of course, there can be other reasons for that. This is just general, but they can be really, really, really distressed. And even when the parent or the caregiver comes back, it takes a long time for them to be comforted and reassured, very, very distrusting and suspicious of the world being a safe place. Okay. They might passively reject their parent and reject that comfort, or be aggressive and become very, very internalized with all of their feelings. All right. Now, it's pretty uncommon. I looked up the stats recently. I don't love stats, but 7 to 15%, which is quite a big percentage, range. But they said about 7 to 15% of children or infants have ambivalent attachment. All right. Now, how does that play out when you're older? So as an adult, we can often see ambivalent attachment show up as a real reluctance to get too close to someone, a real kind of holding back from intimate relationships. And so in conversation, what we could see here is maybe an adult who just, refuses to go there, just has very little interest in going too deep or talking about their emotions or really being vulnerable and opening up to someone. So I really just want you to be aware, because this can also just depend on the relationship. So this is how I have felt towards parents, towards siblings, and in some stages in my marriage towards my husband, where I'm like, I just can't. I just don't want to. I have no desire to. Okay. Ambivalent attachment can also show up in adulthood as worrying that your partner or people don't love you. So again, when we're thinking about conversations, think about if you're coming to your best friend and you really know that there's something in between you that you have to get out and you have to talk about it and fix it, but you worry that they won't love you after that conversation, this is going to come and show up in the conversation. Right? Or you're going to completely ignore the conversation and never had it, and that relationship's going to deteriorate. Okay. And then what's really interesting being ambivalent is that when or if that relationship actually ends, you become really distraught. Like it's like the world is ending and there's a lot of emotion and it takes a long time to process. Okay. So let me go through avoidant attachment. And hopefully you're starting to get some ideas about like maybe some of the ways you're showing up and what's coming up for you in that biology part of your building the conversation, right? What's happening down here. So avoidant attachment, okay, very similar to ambivalent, but with ambivalent attachment, there is often that kind of, but I love them and I want to have the relationship, but then when it gets too deep, I pull away. Avoidant attachment is quite the other end of the spectrum, I guess, further down the end of that spectrum. So it's like, I'm just unwilling to even share my thoughts or feelings with each other. I'm going to just avoid, head in sand. Okay. So children with avoidant attachment styles tend to avoid parents and caregivers completely. Right. They just shut down there. Now, it doesn't have to be like a real aggressive avoidance, but it could just be a complete withdrawal. They just stay in their room for a long time. They just never open up. They just say they're fine all the time when you know that they're not. All right. They might reject attention from a parent, but they also don't seek out comfort or contact. So when they're actually upset, when they're actually sad, something awful happens, they just don't even go to their caregiver. They may, though, go to a complete stranger, which seems really, really weird. But when you think about that, with a stranger, they could have a big vent or a cry or a yell, and then they're not potentially losing that relationship if that person cuts them off, because it's a stranger. It's like whatever. So in adulthood, how this can play out is problems with intimacy, really just not being able to get very intimate with people, again, vulnerable and deep, just avoiding it completely. Probably invest little emotion into social and romantic relationships, unwilling or unable to share your thoughts or feelings with others, and or going to strangers for intimacy. So you might actually feel more comfortable going and having a gossip, or, we all do it, a bitch session with your girlfriends about your partner, than taking it to your partner. You may have a real issue with your employer at work, but you never go and actually have the conversation. You just go and, I don't know, jump onto a social media forum and have a whinge over there, or not. You just avoid. We can sometimes see with avoidant attachment sleeping around, like having a lot of sexual partners, but never going too deep with them, and really just avoiding that sense of intimacy. Okay. So we also have, so I've done avoidant, I've done ambivalent, and I've done secure. So we also have disorganized. So disorganized insecure attachment shows a real sort of lack of clear attachment behavior. So the three that I've already explained, these children and adults don't fit in here. They've got this real disorganized kind of way of being in the world. So their actions and responses to caregivers are often mixed with avoidance and resistance. And sometimes, it's just kind of what we say is like all over the shop. Okay. So when they're children, they might be described as like having dazed behavior, seeming confused, seeming apprehensive, really not knowing, maybe being really, really intimate and like gaining comfort and then just really pushing that person away. All right. We often see this kind of disorganized, insecure attachment across relationships. So this is one that I somewhat identified with very early on in my marriage. I would want closeness and intimacy and tell him that I wanted to be really, really honest and open. And then when it happened, my body would completely shut down and I would be like, nope, can't deal with this. Don't want to go there. And I know through my own therapy why I have that, because I had a very interesting dynamic playing out in my family home, where it was sometimes safe to be all of myself and bring all of myself to the room, and sometimes it wasn't. And so a little bit disorganized in my attachment style. Often people with disorganized attachment or disorganized insecure attachment have taken on a very parental role in their early childhood or adolescence. Okay. And maybe there's been a bit of role reversal where you've been the caregiver for the parent. And so you never got to be just the child. Okay. So having awareness around the attachment styles, I just think it's so, so powerful and helpful. And you might be thinking, gosh, that's a lot of psychology speak, but really the questions that I want you to ask to figure out where you're kind of sitting, and you don't have to fit into one of the attachment styles, of course, but I'm going to give you a few questions around this so you can just play with what parts of these attachment styles show up for me in what conversations or in which relationships, right? So what are your biggest fears when having big conversations? What are the biggest fears that arise for you when you're having these really like heart racing kind of conversations, when you're just like, oh God, I've got to have that conversation with my best friend because, it feels like there's an elephant in the room where we're avoiding it. What are the fears that you have here? And so usually what do I fear? Like, what do I fear losing if I have this conversation? Will I lose respect? Will I lose closeness? Will I lose love? What am I foreseeing happening? What am I foreseeing happening if I actually get on the phone and have a call, or I sit down in front of my partner or my employer or whoever, or my child? What am I fearing happening here? Okay. This is 3 ways of asking the same question. What are my biggest fears about these big conversations? So when you can sit there and go, oh, I'm fearing rejection here. I'm fearing anger from the other person. I'm fearing disappointment from myself because they won't give me what I want. Or I'm fearing that I'm going to let someone down and disappoint them. You can start to then look through the attachment styles and understand potentially where you're at. And if you're really unclear, you might want to bring that to the Q&A, the live Zoom call, or email me and I'll answer it in the Q&A, or I'll answer it privately if you want it answered privately. But you can start to go through and be like, wow, I'll give you an example of a friend of mine. So, she has always struggled to maintain relationships, and she wants them, and then she gets into them and then they become too intimate, and the person is too clingy and loves them too much. And so she ends it. So there's a real disorganized attachment there. There's a real disorganized attachment there. Avoidant and resistant, but also I want it, right? To give you an example. I'm just trying to think of another example for you. I think I've told you I'm a bit disorganized in my attachment with my intimate partners, so my husband and boyfriends beforehand. But with some friendships, I can be really, really avoidant. So I don't share my inner world with very many people. I love my people fiercely, but I don't go to them for advice and I don't rely on them, because one of my internal systems that I have is that I don't need anyone, and that people aren't actually going to show up and they're not reliable, because in my childhood they weren't. Now, I know now through therapy and my own awareness that that's not true. And I know that my friends are absolutely there for me. But I also know that it is a little bit of extra awareness and work for me to share what's going on for me with them. And so I do that because I want to get better, and I do want the intimacy, and I do want the connection, and I love the vulnerability side of things because I think that's how we grow and learn, but it's not my default. And so I have an understanding that in friendships, there is a lot of avoidant attachment for me. So I just hope that, having this awareness, which is imperative, will help you kind of start to predict how you might feel and show up in a conversation with a particular person. It's just being able to say, you know what, I think my default here is going to want to shut it down and not be vulnerable. Or I think I'm going to probably go into this conversation a little bit attacking because I'm actually quite suspicious of people's motives. And I just think if I can maybe attack, then I won't face the rejection and that person's sadness, and I can't hold that, right? You just start to have these conversations. And if it's a really safe conversation with someone who can actually understand this kind of thing, you might even share with them, look, I know that my default's going to be to do this, and I'm going to probably feel this, but I want to work through this. Can we work through this together? I want you to understand what's going on for me internally. Or if you can't say that externally, how do you coach yourself through it? Right? So during the conversation, you can stop and take a circuit breaker, which I'm going to teach you how to do that. And you can actually just feel into your biology, into your body, into your nervous system, be like, it's okay, Carly. This person does love you. Your body is saying they're not gonna love you anymore. Don't say that. Don't say that. But this person, look at them. They love you. They're here. They're having the conversation. You can coach yourself through it. So it's really powerful stuff. And the attachment styles are really, really imperative to be able to just have an understanding of this concept and what you're going to be coming to a conversation with, what's in your backpack. And obviously, of course, it allows you to stop and think what's happening for them. What is their attachment style? What kind of behavior do they expect me to bring to this conversation? What are they preparing for? What's going on inside of them? So hopefully that's helpful. And in the next module, we'll get more into what you see in the building in regards to the 4 C's. So you can start to bring up that awareness to what you're actually doing in your environment, and how your attachment styles are informing your behavior.